So what I'd like to do now is to invite all of the speakers from this morning's session to come back up, and it's over to you in the audience to provide us with some questions. What would you like to hear more about? What's still a little bit uncertain? What hasn't been captured? And we have some people ready to go with roving microphones. Who's first up? Maybe while we're waiting for people to come up with some suggestions, Virginia, you could tell us a little bit more about the whale recordings that we heard as we came in today.
Sure. Can you hear me properly? Just hit the red button. Okay, there we go. So as you walked in today, hopefully you heard some whale sounds over here in the corner. If we play them again during break time, I suggest you go and stand right next to the speakers, because what you're listening to is the loudest biological sound ever recorded. So you're listening to initially Antarctic blue whale calls. We cycle through a few other species and through seals as well, but the Antarctic blue whale sound is the one that rumbles in your chest and shakes the walls. So I'll turn those back on at break time, and I recommend you go have a listen.
Thanks, Virginia. I think Keith has a question here. And please do introduce yourself so that we can get to know each other throughout the day as well.
Thanks. Is that, yeah, it's working? Sorry, Keith Taylor, supervising scientist based in Darwin. Look, thank you for the invitation to come down today, and this is amazing. It's incredibly exciting. I've got a comment, I think, more than a question. It was something that you said, Virginia, in passing in your presentation about the length of the science program and the consistency of that program. And over the years, I've had, unfortunately, some quite senior people sort of question why government does research, and it's not sort of just done by academic institutions. And I think it's really worth emphasising the value add is those very long-term investments and the consistency of those research programs over time that, as you mentioned, is hard to achieve in academia. And I just think that this is an amazing showcase of just that, and that's why research done by government is so critically important. So, sorry, it's more of a comment, but it's something that's come up for me a few times.
My response is, I agree.
I think you're absolutely right. And, you know, I spoke this morning about the development of an East Antarctic monitoring program. Really, that can't be achieved unless you're doing that as part of government science. And yes, it will integrate the science from other government agencies and from academia, but you can't commit to that kind of long-term sustained observations if you're operating on 3-year ARC cycles. So, thanks, Keith. Kim, you're not allowed to ask a question. You should know it all.
Well, I will anyway. Sorry, Nicole. It's really a question for the three of you. Clearly, you can't deliver your specific streams of science alone. So apart from the brilliant leadership you get in the AAD, who do you really rely on to achieve your outcomes? You know, both in the climate science, in the krill, in the whales.
I'll jump in first. Thank you, Kim, for that really good opportunity to shout out to the absolutely critical collaborations we have nationally and internationally in the climate space. I mentioned that the Antarctic Climate Program is embedded within the AAPP, that's the Australian Antarctic Program Partnership. We also contribute into the ACES SRI, some collaboration and I think growing connections into the SAFE SRI. Without these connections, we couldn't possibly deliver the breadth of interconnected science that's necessary. We're a small organisation in a small country, and in fact, to echo that, we absolutely rely on our connections internationally through the Ice Core community, through the glaciological, the SCAR community, to actually leverage and fill out the contributions that we are best suited to make. So that's a quick potted summary.
And I'll provide a little insight on the biological side. I mean, of course, the peer-reviewed literature is the ultimate leverage we have in producing, you know, getting respect for Australian science. We need those high-profile journals. But it's really our inputs into policy in terms of biology that is really critical. So CAMLR, the Commission for the Conservation of Antarctic Marine Living Resources, the International Whaling Commission, and the Agreement for the Conservation of Albatrosses and Petrels. These bodies are places that we feed information into that that really set the framework for how these things are going to be managed internationally, and it's where Australia can really shine because we've got the credentials to do this and do it well. So I think that's really important, and also just generally into government as well, because we're putting sort of policy advice into things like offshore wind farms and things like that, how that can affect marine creatures, because we have the expertise in that field.
So I would agree with Rob and all the things he said, but I'd also say, as I highlighted in my talk, that one of the key reasons we've had success is through our close relationship with our technology and innovation branch at the Antarctic Division, which is a branch full of very creative, inspired, hardworking people who can see the picture the way we see it and help us deliver it. So, yep, that's been instrumental to our success.
At the back.
Hey, good morning. Dan Atwater from the Royal Australian Navy, and I think it's a question for all three of you, but it was a topic that Nicole, you brought up at the beginning with IDEA that is, looks like it's tying together a large, vast array of the data that's going to be associated with the upcoming decadal amount of collection we're doing within the AAD and Australia. And I'm just curious if anyone wants to speak to that on the topic of data and sharing of it with international as well as interagency partners and those who are wanting to do citizen science even. Thanks.
I think you're going to hear a lot more about that shortly from Alex Terords. He's going to talk about the IDEA program and the East Antarctic Monitoring Program. So rather than steal his thunder, we'll leave that one with him. But it's a very, very exciting program offshoot from science, and it's really going to deliver big picture science in an integrated fashion to make it much more useful. So we're looking forward to it.
I would also add, about a year ago now, we undertook a review of the science being undertaken at the Antarctic Division in the context of the science being undertaken in the broader Antarctic program. And one of the key findings from that review was that we have some really valuable data streams, but they're totally disconnected from each other. We might monitor penguins on one side of the East Antarctica and have all of our atmospheric and sea ice data on the other side. And so it's actually to be able to answer those really challenging questions that I talked about this morning. It's how do we bring those things together? And we're not just talking Antarctic Division data, it's how do we work with our other government agencies and our university collaborators and our international partners to actually make the use of this step change in data delivery that we're going to see in the next decade. Really good point. Dave.
We've got a question online. So for Virginia, somebody would like to know if there's a copy of those recordings available on the internet or intranet.
The whale recordings.
The reason I paused is because I do believe there should be something within the next week. My colleague Brian Miller has just published a paper that we're going to be doing some media around this week. So keep an eye on our Antarctic Division media webpage, and I reckon there will be some recordings there. You do need a subwoofer though to give them, I don't know, to get them.
My scientist did make an argument for a rather substantive investment in new speakers and subwoofers for this particular purpose. At the back.
Hi, thanks, Nicole. Yes, Russell Miles. I'm the new director of the Department of Foreign Affairs new international Antarctic section. So I had an international question, which Kim had sort of already asked, which was just to tell us a little bit more about some of those international partnerships that you have. So I guess to follow up from what you've already sort of said, I'd keen to sort of know what you think we could do more of in that space in the next 5 years. If there's opportunities there that you see that we can do more. The other thing, and maybe it's more of a question for Ben on his question, but we often talk about how we get the science to policymakers for decision making. But I've been, having just come off Australia's climate change negotiating team, I'm always quite conscious about how are we getting information to some of our partners in the region, and especially around when you're talking about sea level rise, to our partners in the Pacific, and to help them make adaptation decisions. And so maybe that's a question for Ben, which I'll ask him individually, but I think that's sort of a question for you as well, in terms of, we talk a lot about getting decision makers information in Australia, but is there more that we can do in the region, and how would you suggest we go about that? Thanks.
Thanks, Russell. In the absence of being able to get Ben online, I might just pass straight to Taz, who would be able to put some context around that now, and will also be able to really, I think, quite elegantly speak to the international context.
Certainly. I'll start with the latter point on getting the information to our partners. I think there's essentially a body of work to be done that's not necessarily from scratch. I think people have been doing a lot in their own patches, but what we're looking to do is to develop our sort of iterative loops so that the information that we provide, the digestion and advice that we can provide from things like IPCC reports to help inform and interpret that, along with our partners in the academic sector. I think there's a missing piece here that we want to bring people together to actually develop that iteration that you're offering to actually facilitate. So I think we need to keep the dialogue going. Basically, part of our being here today is to tell you the sorts of things that we might be able to tell you and start that dialogue. To take one step back, we already have a range of ad hoc connections that arise partly due to our expertise over time. So we've got staff who work into the World Climate Research Program in various officer or committee roles. We've got people who have got positions in SCAR. Myself, I'm involved in the Peak Ice Core community globally. And so we've got these sort of ad hoc connections that we can bring together, but we are looking for our own Antarctic Division policy section as well as connections there to fill out and strengthen our ability to provide what is pretty time-critical advice, as you would have seen from the presentations.